Hello, physics and physical science teachers. Today we're going to look at Multimedia Science's Bouncing Spring Lab. The goal of this lab is to develop the equation that relates the period, the mass, and the spring constant for a spring. Let's start the lab. You can see that here is the spring, the mass, and you can change the spring constant or the mass and then start the simulation. And then reset this. Let's make the mass be a lot larger. So the first thing that you can do is just have your students change these variables and take a look at how the spring reacts, and they can get a pretty good feel for how the spring constant and the mass will change the period. But we want to go a little bit further than that. We want to use graphical analysis to find the exact equation for the spring. So let's reset. And what we can do is run two experiments. One, we will run the spring constant versus the period. And then we'll run a second experiment where we measure the mass versus the period. So it's pretty easy. There is a help screen for the students just in case they're a little confused by all the buttons and possibilities, but it's pretty simple. We set the spring constant, for instance. We'll leave the mass constant, and we will take a number of readings with a constant mass by changing the spring constant and measuring the period. And then for the second experiment, we'll keep the spring constant constant, and we'll change the mass and measure the period. Pretty easy to run the experiment. We'll start it. There's a line that students can use to set. I usually find it works best to set it right at the bottom of the object. And then they should probably take 10 periods to make sure that the timing is not so short that it's difficult to get good results. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and there is our first reading. And then we'll reset the timer, we'll reset our experiment, and we'll continue to take data. There is a set of instructor's notes that come along with the experiment in Word format. You can see that this is just a little overview describing the experiment, some screenshots, exactly how you open up and run the lab, and then a quick look and overview. And here you can see the first experiment, which is period versus spring constant. Here's the second experiment where we have period versus the mass, and then our final graph, which shows the period with the combination of the mass and the spring constant, which gives us a straight line and the final equation. Of course, there is a lab handout for the students, which has an introduction, talks about the computer simulation, the objectives, the procedure. The students will have to make their own data tables and do their calculations using Excel. Also included is an Excel spreadsheet, which gives you the data. You can see we've taken two sets of data at different periods for a given mass. The graph leads you to the relationship between the period and the mass. And then secondly, here are two sets of data for the period and the spring constant, which if you do a curve fit here, you'll come up with a relationship between the period and the spring constant. Putting those together and taking all of the data now, here's the straight line, which leads to your final equation, which is the whole point of the experiment. So if you're interested in getting a copy of the Bouncing Spring Lab, you can go to Teachers Pay Teachers. Here is the URL. And this is the page that you'll be taken to. And you can see there's a product description. It's downloaded as an exec file to run on your PC. So thanks for listening.